Dr. Chris Winslow, director for Ohio Sea Grant, which is a federal funded program to address issues in Lake Erie. And then I'm director of Ohio State University Stone Lab, which is the university's owned island that is in the middle of Lake Erie where these blooms are occurring. Ohio Sea Grant, when we talk about harmful algal blooms, the four major areas where we fund research, the first one is how do we treat water? So if the water has toxins into it, how can we inform the water treatment plant operators the best way to remove those toxins so that they aren't exposed to humans? The second one is the human health risk to those toxins. So if you were exposed, whether through drinking water or through recreating, swimming on that lake, what are the effects that are going to happen to your body? And not only how it affects your body, a lot of that research is on therapeutic answers. So what medicine can we give you so that you're less impacted by that toxin? The third category is how the blooms behave. So where are they in the water column, up and down? Where are the toxins? Are they high in the water, low in the water? What temperatures do they like? When do they start producing toxins? Why are they producing toxins? So it's really more understanding the nature of the problem. And then the last one is nutrient reduction. So we work with farmers to get nutrients to stop coming off ag fields. We work with wastewater treatment plants so that when they treat waste, that they're not expelling phosphorus into the system. We work with homeowners that have personal home sewage treatment systems or septic tanks. So the big four categories that we're working in is human health risks. How do we remove toxins from drinking water? How do we understand how these organisms behave? And how do we slow the movement of nutrients? So we've probably funded since 2015, right after our Toledo drinking water crisis happened. So we had our city that had that issue. $2 million has been invested every year. So 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So in 9 years times $2 million, we put $18 million to fund research to help those state agencies solve the problem. And that's just in Ohio. That's not the other states, it's not our federal government, it's just Ohio investments in HABs has been $18 million. So there's probably 100 or 120 projects that we have funded to give answers to those state agencies. The human health risks, we're making progress. So we know how it affects the body. So if you have irritable bowel syndrome or if you have fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, we know you're high risk. So we know more there, but we're not done. And all the therapeutic stuff we've done, so the medicines that you could take to make the problem decrease, most of those have been on mice models. So we haven't done a lot with humans yet. So we have a lot of space that we need to go in that area. The biggest one for us is going to be, how do you stop the nutrients from getting into the river? And even if we know tools, meaning we can't broadcast apply our fertilizer, we have to inject it into the soil. Telling farmers they have to do that is step one. Actually, finding a way for them to do it is a harder problem because it's expensive for the farmer to do it. And so even though they know that's what they should be doing, financially they can't get there. Farmers should soil test before they put the nutrients. So we've taught farmers, go out and test your soil. If it has enough phosphorus and it has enough nitrogen in it, then don't apply any fertilizers. But we have to teach the farmers how to soil test, where to soil test. So we're learning a lot about how to slow nutrient runoff from agricultural fields, but getting the people that live on the land to actually do it is just, it's a heavy lift. It's going to take a lot of work. At Ohio State University, we have what's called land grant. So I'm Sea Grant, I work on the water. Land grant works on the landscape. And so that group of people have relationships with those farmers. So when I told you we conduct all this research, once we find those answers, I don't just give it to the agencies and to the mayors or the elected officials. I go to that land grant person and I say, can you take this to your farmers? And so basically we've tried to make a connection between the researcher and a friend of those farmers. And so what we do is we just work really hard to connect the researchers to people that have a relationship with the farmers. If I go to a farmer and tell them, hey, I'm a professor at the university, I can help you, they're going to look at me and say, I don't know who you are, therefore I don't trust you. So what we've had to do is not me give the information to the farmers, but me to find a trusted resource for the farmers, and they communicate that information. Good. So in Ohio, we know exactly how much phosphorus and exactly how much nitrogen corn needs to grow. So what we tell farmers is only apply that much. We're not telling them to stop applying fertilizers. What we found is that some farmers think that if they put extra fertilizer on there, they'll get extra growth, but there's a cap. So if they apply any more than this amount of phosphorus, they're just applying the phosphorus and it's just sitting out there. So we're not telling them not to apply phosphorus. We're trying to tell them to test your soils first. And if your soils are low, add a little bit, because when you grow the crop, it'll be sucked into the plant. The problem that we've had historically is that farmers think that the phosphorus stays there. So if they have a good year and they make a lot of money, they say, I'm going to put extra fertilizer out there so that it's there when I don't have money to buy fertilizer. But it doesn't stay. So we're not telling farmers to stop applying fertilizer. We're telling them to just apply the amount that your crops need and no more. And what we found out is that if the phosphorus in the soil is at that crop growing rate, it typically doesn't run off the field. The places where it runs off the field are those places that they have too much phosphorus in the soil. So,
the right amount of the fertilizer.
Correct. And so if they follow that right amount, even though they're putting less on and they're listening to us and not putting more on, they're still getting the maximum yield that they would have gotten before. So when we talk to farmers, we talk about what we call the 4 R's. The first R is the right rate, and that is the soil test. We're teaching our farmers, measure your soil first. If the phosphorus is low, go ahead and add. If the phosphorus is high, don't add. So right rate. Right time is what we've just told you. Don't put it on in the winter and don't put it on in front of the rain. Right place, and that is, again, don't set it on the surface, inject it into the soil. And then the 4th R is the right type, and that is, you can use manure, so animal waste, or you can use store-bought fertilizer, but don't use both, right? Because then you'll over-apply nutrients. So right rate, so soil test, right time, not when it's raining, right place, meaning inject it, and right type means only use one or the other, don't use both manure and commercial. And so all the science has created those 4 R's. I hand those 4 R's to this gentleman or young lady that then goes to the farmer and says, hey, this is what you should be doing. It depends, but we tell them you should probably do it every 3 years, at least every 5. So 3 or 5 years, somewhere in that window. And it depends. A lot of farmers will just take their field and divide it into grids and take a sample from each one of those grids. What we've now learned is rather than just a big box, measure your land, because if it has like hills and valleys, you should probably do more soil tests at the top of the hill and at the valley, because at the top, it's probably going to be nutrient poor because all of it runs downhill. And in the valley, it's probably going to be nutrient high because that's where it collects. So don't just randomly grab a square, but map your farm field and measure it high hills and low hills, and that's how you should probably gauge it. But every 3 to 5 years. Yep. So for us, there is a lot of data out there. I mean, you can come to U.S. literature that says, here's how you remove the toxins from the water, and here's where your health risk is for aerosol, so breathing it in, or skin exposure. So those numbers are already out there. I mean, you might want to study them a little bit more in South Korea. My argument for you is that you need to know where the nutrients are coming from. It took us 7-8 years to know that most of it is coming from ag. So if you're going to invest in solutions and try and solve the problem, you don't want to be spending a bunch of money in wastewater treatment plants if they're not releasing the nutrients. So for us, in the western basin of Lake Erie, about 8% of the phosphorus is coming from wastewater treatment plants. About 4% is coming from home sewage treatment systems. About 88% is coming from ag. So for us, if you're going to solve the problem, you need to know where to invest the money. And so in our case, we're trying to invest the most amount of money in addressing runoff from ag. So for me, we have a lot of brilliant academics that study toxicity, and they study our problem, and it's not a problem, our challenge right now is the social science. we think too much about the biology and the chemistry and the physics of the bloom. If I'm going to say, farmer, don't apply in the summer, and they don't trust me, or I don't know why the farmer is making the decisions they're making. So here's the time you can be in the field. Some date and time, that I can be out there putting fertilizers. If I go to that farmer and tell him he can't apply in the winter, his time to be on that field just did this. And if I tell him he can't be out before it rains, his window went like this. So I can tell him not to do those, and from a biology perspective, it makes sense. But if I'm that farmer that used to have this much time to get out on my field, and now you're telling me I have this much time, is that farmer going to listen? I don't know, right? If I tell that farmer, don't apply the fertilizer on the surface, inject it, and the science makes sense, the biology makes sense, but then I go to the farmer and say, hey, you got to buy this equipment to inject your field, and it costs $78,000, is that farmer going to make that decision, right? So part of the issue we have now is we can do the biology, chemistry, and physics, but the social science, the behavior of the person, the behavior that doesn't want to be told what to do, or they don't have the money to get there. So the big gap we have right now is, why do farmers do what they do? And why is that not meshing with what we hope they would? So I think we need more social science. And so there is going to be some engineering and some chemical advances, but for me it's the science that helps people connect. It's not necessarily the science that solves the physical problem.